Welcome everyone. Good day. And once again, it's Saturday Talk. We are the Men's Human Rights Discourse server. We are the semi-official men's rights subreddit Discourse server with a very special talk, very special chat. It's about men's mental health crisis and how to fix it, how to identify what we consider to be the main problems and main examples. We're going to be talking about a lot of mental health crisis going on with police officers, with veterans of war who are predominantly male. We're going to be talking about the over medication of school students, especially the ones that happen to be diagnosed with ADHD, for example. And with us, we have our lovely panel. Once again, we can make us whole. Men are human, Fa and Taz. And whomever wants to give out the first openings, you're welcome to do so. I don't know if anybody has anything to say.
Yeah, I'll start us off. I'm Taz, and I've been thinking quite a lot lately about either accusation or concern from outside all of the manosphere, especially MRAs, that we do a poor job of managing our mental and emotional health. And that our Achilles heel is that we can always be dismissed as crazy, regardless of whether it's a mental health issue for a boy in school, being treated with dubious medications, or young man in higher education or early in the working world who's struggling with any mental health issues, whether they be organic or derived from something that happened to them, up through the issues faced. For example, you mentioned military veterans, whether they've been in combat or not. They routinely report levels of trauma that just don't, exist outside of their number. Groups of men, such as police officers, any kind of security or defensive career. They struggle with trying to keep it together. Young men, especially, but all men, that have issues of alienated fatherhood, family court injustice, criminal court injustice. Very often the two go hand in hand. And they end up being disrupted in mind and emotion in ways that they can't just like flip a switch and get over. Now there's a laundry list of different ways that everybody tells us we need to employ in order to take better care of our brains and our souls, and they come at us from every angle. From the psychiatric and psychological communities, from the social work communities, from the churches, from the from the education system, from the from the academies. They all seem to have this idea that they know exactly what to do to fix us. And it runs the gamut, everything from I was talking about weekend men's retreats where we get back in touch with our I guess more primitive or more essential nature, and learn how to embrace it, and make use of it and integrate it into our life, all the way out through our only problem is that, our only problem is the same problem everybody else has, and that's, things like patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacist imperialism, et cetera, et cetera. And if we were to throw these things off, then somehow, our desire to kill ourselves either quickly or slowly would suddenly go away. I'm not convinced, around any of those things. Talk therapy, I always have to tell people it really worked great for me. And I always follow that up by saying, so what? One of me, 4 billion to go. What works for me doesn't work for most guys. It just doesn't. I mean, even if they're particularly not, bought into patriarchy or not particularly bought into stoicism, whatever. I mean, if you don't have whatever it is they're saying we have too much of, just talking out your problems may or may not do anything. And even if it does, it might not stick. I'm in a situation where I can always make sure that what I do sticks because I'm not doing anything too much else. But it's what I like to do. If hundreds of millions of men all of a sudden decided that they were going to do life the way I do it, society and culture would crumble in a week. We can't afford to have, men suffering follow me in my footsteps in those numbers. It just won't work. So we need to come up with, other alternatives, A, that actually work, and B, that are not, an affront to our human dignity. So that's me. Thanks.
Absolutely. One of the worst parts that I've seen personally, that I've witnessed, is when normal, regular man that just happen to need a little bit of guidance, they get actually misdiagnosed. They get their normal interactions, they get pathologized, and they're lumped into the category of mentally ill men, which it really complicates things, because there's one thing for sure: there's a lot of men who have mental illnesses. There's a lot of there is a mental health crisis that is going unaddressed, and sometimes people misfire. Sometimes people misdiagnose, like regular healthy men. They pathologize what they are, what they do, because they want an answer. Nobody likes the gray area. One of those things that I've noticed is, unfortunately, when it comes to normal, healthy masculinity, the desire men have for competition, or just bodybuilding, maybe maybe a shorter attention span, which could cause a little bit of troubles. Those little things, they are elevated into they're pathologized into a mental illness. They are then try to push for an answer as quickly as possible. It's normally medication of somehow, which is pretty saddening, because we do know that there are problems out there that men face, and this I think this is just an indication of how little we know, because if we don't know how to separate the normal healthy men from the ones that do require a lot of mental health help, then that's how we know the problem is deeper than we ever thought. I don't know if anybody has ever seen this. I don't know if anybody else has another example of this, but my go-to is always DHD medication and ADHD diagnosis on little boys that didn't actually need it, to be honest. Because that's what I've actually experienced myself. when I used to go to like secondary school. I don't know if anybody else has ever seen something like this.
Myself am old enough that I missed a lot of that. But really everything, everything I hear about it pretty much corresponds with the way you described it. That any issues with attention span or, activeness, for lack of a better word, is immediately, labeled ADHD or some kind of anxiety disorder, or like some kind of mental disorder, and those ones, they're if they are real, they're organic. You're born that way, right? You're born with the predisposition to be attention deficit and hyperactive, or greatly anxious, or to have a short attention span. Right now, obviously, they can be treated, and they can be, they can be dealt with. A lot of times, the medications, for the real examples of it, they work good, right? And people swear by it. But if you give it to a healthy kid who's just, active because he's a little boy, you run the risk of, it making things worse, and B, over the long haul, whatever that medication does to him while he's taking it, probably going to follow him for the rest of his life. It will alter him, right? And altering people is never a good idea unless you know exactly what you're going to turn them into.
Have you ever heard of there's a guy called Gabor Mate? Have you ever heard of him?
He's a hero of mine.
Oh, really? I didn't know that you knew about him. But yeah, he talks about like there are the two types. They're the one who are born with it, and then he says that you can actually induce ADHD actually. If you actually stress a person enough, you can actually develop ADHD because of the stress, which is so interesting. So
another thing that can cause it is no rough and tumble play.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's like kids not being able to play causes ADHD a lot. It's I mean, a lot of what we think of as ADHD is actually kids being hyperactive and forced to sit in a classroom for 7 hours at a stretch. But I think there's probably an even bigger problem with all of this, which is that the definition of masculinity in the mainstream psychological like literature now, well, at least up until 2018, was that it was a kind of pathology. And I'm talking about the APA's guidelines on men. Their first guidelines on men literally said masculinity is a pathology and that they need to cure it, basically.
Yeah. Well, you always need to take everything that they say with a grain of salt, because it's such the human sciences in general, they're not a hard science. That's the reason why you get so many like insane headlines, like people experimenting with the idea that religiosity is somehow linked to mental illnesses, for example. So you always have to take all of the studies that they're making with a grain of salt and a lot of skepticism, because it's not, if you can actually avoid the ideological trappings, like there is so much causation and correlation going on there when it comes to pathologizing completely normal things. Like so one of the biggest problems that I've seen is how men are compared to women. So if normal women can be like, sitting still and listen to the class teacher for like the 7 hours, that's considered to be somehow the standard. If the boys break that standard, they're considered to be the problem instead of the institution itself doing badly, There's a lot of like victim blaming when it comes to boys because they're not the ones, doing what's easier for the teachers, because it is harder to teach a boy instead of a girl. So they get the blame because they're making their jobs harder instead of just adapting to it. And obviously the statistics don't lie. There's a lot of dropouts in universities and even in secondary schools when it comes to teenage boys. Not the women though. The women are doing fine, but because the education is not tailored to them, well, not only the ones that do require mental health help go through the door and they're never seen back, even the healthy ones are also ignored. It is a giant problem, to be honest.
I'd like to chime in on that. A very good point, Mel. I'd also like to add, one of the things that people generally say is that men are not behaving properly, but I happen to think that the culture that we live in, which is man-made actually, the way our lives work is not something that we have historically or back in early mankind was in any way normal. So at this point, if you were to look at, let's say, Aboriginal cultures and at the way that the uncontacted tribes in the Amazon might operate, the guys go off and hunt, the ladies stay back in the camp and prepare food or whatever. The guys, if they had ADHD and they're out hunting, you wouldn't notice because they're doing exactly what was appropriate for the way that they are. And the way that our culture is set up, having those skills and those reactions is no longer appropriate. But it's because our culture is pathologized, not us. So that's the point I wanted to make.
Oh yeah, like it totally makes sense because like one of the biggest problems is like nowadays, we're making sure certain types of people have a harder time to actually survive. Because what you were saying is like you can get someone that maybe has one disadvantage, one struggle, like ADHD, and in a very specific, broad sense, it will go unnoticed because no one is putting any limitations, no roadblocks into their success. But nowadays, when it comes to our society, we're making sure certain people don't survive and cannot be like productive or successful. And you can actually see that with a lot of like people with autism. Again, when it comes to statistics, a gigantic percent of people with autism are either unemployed or underemployed, which means like maybe they get like a job that like maybe they can work for 4 hours instead of 8, part-time job, and that's all they're gonna get, which is a giant problem because like we don't have we're not structured a society in which a lot of people can survive no matter what. We're making sure more like time and time again, a very specific type of person can survive the society that we're building. And if people don't conform to that, then they're just phased out. They have no resources, which is pretty horrible. And obviously, the roots that we're seeing, it's mostly men. It's men the ones that are suffering like the most right now. But the second this issue grows into affecting women, we're going to see a backlash into it. We're going to see a lot of people saying that our society should be more open towards rewarding everyone, you know? So that's the problem right now. It's because it's affecting men first. So people just ignore it, which is a giant issue. And in my opinion, it all stems down from the idea that men and women are like perfectly equal, biologically speaking. Like again, if we make women out to be the barometer, you know, the thing that we are supposed to measure, obviously men are never going to be able to measure up against it because we know that men and women are different. But when it comes to society, the like pushes the idea that men and women are already equal, then those men that are not measuring up, those must be some weird outliers that we don't have to even worry about. We can just abandon them. So that is the toxic ideology of pretending that we are already equal or pretending that we are a post-equality society, in my opinion.
Has anyone heard of any type of a school situation that's restructured or redesigned so that boys, the way they are, would be more comfortable in that structure?
Not sure what you mean. Like a school teaching structure that boys are comfortable in?
Not just teaching, but I mean, we've already said several times that always sitting for 7 hours in a desk, quiet, is probably harder for some percentage of guys to do. But what is an alternative that would make more sense?
You know, I've heard that. Have you ever heard of the Nordic model of teaching in schools? It's like
What model?
there's a Nordic model. They call that the Nordic model of teaching in schools. So it's like they allow the students to actually they allow them to take whatever classes they want, and they can actually exclude some of them. Like if they don't like history, they don't have to take it. It's based on a point system. So yeah, and there are no exams or whatever. So I'm gonna try looking into it, but I heard that it has a lot of positive results when it comes to the male students when you allow them to choose the teachers and the subjects that they want to learn. I think it has a lot of positive connotations, but I heard that.
That sounds interesting. I'm thinking when you're talking, I'm thinking about how it would scale and kind of translate over here in the States. It's possible, and maybe it would be beneficial overall, but we'd literally have to restructure everything about public education over here from pre-K all the way through graduate school. But it could be done, I suppose.
Restructuring doesn't sound bad to me.
Yeah.
I've heard of the school associated with the Tesla company, where employees have a school associated there where there's no grade levels, there's no grades, and the objectives are basically project based. where let's say that the objective is build a robot. And if that's the main objective, all the things associated with that the child would have to learn, whether it be the hardware engineering, the software, documentation, the interpersonal, building the team, getting the appropriate materials together, all of that stuff becomes the curriculum. And it sounds interesting to me. I don't know a whole lot about it yet, but from what I heard, it sounds like a much more appropriate way to have an education.
Well, I guess I'm not thinking so much about that as I am. In other words, say tomorrow morning we all wake up and the education system is totally revamped in that way. The trouble is the only thing that accounts for is, people starting out right now at like the age of 5. And, there's like 400 million people here that already got screwed up. And like I say, even if the system itself is corrected, it's going to put the recipients of that correction, into the world that we have right now. I don't know if they'd even be able to navigate it. They'd basically be running into the same wall that we all do, that, you don't get to choose very much. You don't have nearly as much autonomy as you would have under those conditions.
So you're saying there might be a problem managing all of that autonomy?
In the culture that we're in right now, it sounds like it would be next to impossible. Okay. Like I say, they'd be coming out into a world where the word that they hear most often is no. And I don't know. Like I say, that is what you're describing is a whole lot closer to the way I would have it. But it would require that all the grown-ups that are already here, like pick up the slack and make the adjustments in order to take that new kind of educated student into the world. And I think that would not be easy. It's the same. It's the same kind of quandary and conundrum, that's faced by I guess revolutionaries of any kind. That they want to tear everything down and start over, which is fine. But what do you do with all the people that, have been functioning in the system you want to tear down, some of them for decades? What do you do? Round them up? Because that's what they did in the Soviet Union and, during the Cultural Revolution in China, et cetera, et cetera. But that didn't play out too good. So, like I say, in other words, you got to come up with a plan that accounts for everything, not just education. Didn't say it was going to be easy.
How do you solve all the problems at once?
I'm sorry?
You're talking about solving all problems at once.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, the trick is you don't.
Or correcting them a lot more slowly than, people people have the patience for.
Well, what you have to do is strike a middle ground there. You have to start affecting the changes you know are going to work. For example, let's take the American education system. One of the first things I'd rip out is those overly frequent mandatory tests. I'd get rid of the scantrons, and I would get them to basically mark based on work as it happens. So you get a grade based on how well you do a particular topics, and your grade at the end of the year is basically all of that added up. Now that's partly how it works already, but a lot of America's education system comes down to these one-shot tests, and they keep adding more of them. And I think this is a huge mistake, because the more tests you have, the more it becomes about the kids learning to pass the tests rather than learning how to get an education. Other things I teach are life skills. These are all things that you can institute fairly quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, in my opinion, like, we should go back to a model of apprenticeship in which, like, you get like children or students like choosing what they want to develop in life. Like, if it comes down to they want to become some sort of professional in an area, they should be geared. Their entire education should be geared towards that, towards getting to that place. And for the children that don't really know what they want to become, they can just choose a general education. But in my opinion, it should come down to giving the students the choice and the free will to do whatever they want with their education, Because the biggest issue, it comes down to forcing people to study things they don't like. Because that's impossible. And we are asking teachers to do the impossible when it comes to that, Like like telling a teacher, you have to force other people to appreciate and study something they don't like. We know it's impossible, yet we force the teachers to do that. And even though they do the best they can, it's so obvious that they're not superheroes. They just can't do it. And it comes down to the destructive desire to force others to do something they don't want to do. That is mainly the problem. But I want to steer the conversation away from education back to the topic of mental health, but specifically when it comes down to your police officers, military veterans, and I do have something to say about the police workforce. It is, in my opinion, a meat grinder, in the sense that we take young rookies, young recruits, and we send them out into the streets where they can be harmed. So we always hear these types of stories, the stories in which there's so many untreated PTSD when it comes to officers. There's so much mental unrest. There's such for example, a high rates of violence within the family, like familial violence, when it comes to cops, and in my opinion, it all comes down to the fact that their job is extremely stressful, and we are sending a bunch of people into high stress scenarios where they might be killed, they might get shot, and we are expecting them to do their job, come back safe, and if they're not, well, that's just another loss. And we don't really have a mechanism of actually addressing the real issue, which is the cops need some sort of we have implemented a backup system, sending 2 cops instead of 1 and all of that. And sometimes it's just not enough, because the high risk part of the job is, in my opinion, what's causing the stress and what's actually developing all of those issues when it comes to their mental health. you know?
Mhm.
And like I haven't heard of good propositions when it comes to like solving this, because we do know we need cops, but like in my opinion, it is insane how we are sending cops into sometimes into like war zones of very poor areas with high levels of gun ownership, gang activity, and we're just expecting them to patrol them, keeping the population safe. And it's no wonder that so many cops, they rather just stay in the nice area because they know they have no chance of helping the people there, you know? And then this is the biggest issue when it comes to like police brutality, when people say the cops are just shooting first and then asking questions later. And then my question is like, what other choice they have if we are sending them like we're sending like a minority of cops to deal with such a big issue, such a giant level of violence and criminality, and we're like giving them so much responsibility. Like sometimes they can only respond violence with violence so they can survive, you know? That is, in my opinion, the biggest problem. How we're just sending like fresh corpses onto a bigger problem.
Right. It's it's just like military training. You're training people basically to maximize their own trauma and their own, their ability to generate trauma for themselves and for others, while at the same time not even addressing the fact that, it's trauma is, at the end of the day, it's just alteration. And it just changes you from whatever you were before the trauma to whatever you're going to be after, and like people go through experiences every day. Some of them are unpleasant, but they don't change you. I mean, they're absorbable. They can be taken on and gotten over. The definition of trauma is something that happens to you that, your psyche and, its connections to your body can't overcome and can't account for. They're just rolling around loose inside you. And when it comes, like I've spoken to combat veterans that have been diagnosed with PTSD, and of course, a lot of people that have been diagnosed with complex PTSD due to childhood traumas. And, the common thread is always the same. It wasn't a matter of exactly what happened, more that it's when it happened to them, and, whether or not they were prepared for it. I've heard of people that have gone through, really horrendous stuff, but, they weren't traumatized. They weren't changed by it, because they were prepared for it and they could deal with it. Then again, I've talked to people that have had things happen to them that, in the grand scheme of things, don't necessarily sound that bad, but the point is it was too much for them, and it was enough that, like I say, it just sits there in the back of your head, intruding on your everyday life, on your just regular routine doings. For people in law enforcement, people in military being sent into combat, like I said, that's the one thing, that's like the third rail, for those institutions. It's the one thing they don't want to touch. They know if they do, for one thing, they're going to have to admit that, they're literally training people to inflict and receive, traumas. But the other thing about it is, if you say you recognize that and you're going to do something about it, then same question. Okay, what? You know, what exactly is it you're going to do, right? How will you account for what you have done to these people? You know, because if you don't, if they're still going to be here, you know, and they're not going to be well, and they're going to be less predictable. You know, they're going to be much more difficult to, you know, to be around, right, under certain conditions. And like I say, it's one of those things. You either just keep living with it until it becomes part of the wallpaper, right? Or, you know, you say, well, you know, I guess we ought to stop doing this to them. You know, but then again, that, you know, it's like if you don't have police officers that are trained, then what do you do about crime? You know, if you don't have military combatants in a time of, you know, the threat of war, then what do you do about the threat of war? You know, none of these answers are easy, right? And like I say, the easier thing to do is just pretend like it's not there.
Absolutely. And with that, we have come to the end of the Saturday Talk, actually. I want to thank everyone for participating and joining in today. We are the Men's Human Rights Discourse server, the semi-official men's rights subreddit Discourse server. We love to hear what you guys have to say. We're always open for suggestions and topics for the next Saturday Talk. And everyone is also welcome to join the unofficial Friday Talk that we have every single Friday. So let us know, and we'll be seeing each other next week.
All right. Thank you.